Welcome, everyone. I'm Gregg Masters, executive producer and co-host of PopHealth Week on Healthcare Now Radio. This live edition of the AMCP podcast series is powered by PopHealth Week. Joining me in the virtual studio is lead co-host Fred Goldstein, president of Accountable Health, LLC. On today's show, we speak with primary care pediatrician and physician entrepreneur Andre Ostrovsky, MD, FAAP, managing partner, Social Innovation Ventures, and former U.S. Medicaid Chief Medical Officer, and Lisa Palko, PharmD, Vice President and Head of Medical Affairs for Akili. We discuss the ADHD landscape, conventional therapeutics, and contributions from the emerging field of digital therapeutics, including the Endeavor RX platform. Akili changed our perception of medicine when they received FDA authorization for the first prescription video game treatment. Akili brings together neuroscience, technology, and entertainment to develop video game-based treatments for cognitive impairments in patients with conditions including ADHD, multiple sclerosis, depression, autism, and COVID brain fog. And with that introduction, Fred, over to you.
Thanks so much, Gregg, and Andre and Lisa. Welcome to PopHealth Week.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Good to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you both on this second episode here, discussing a really fascinating topic on ADHD and some of the work Akili's doing. So why don't we start with a quick background? Perhaps, Andre, you could go first, a little bit of your background.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks a lot, Fred. I'm Dr. Andre Ostrovsky. I'm a primary care pediatrician. I attend at a federally qualified health center in D.C. called Mary Center. And prior to that, I attended as a hospitalist at Children's National for 7 years. I spend only a couple days a month doctoring. I spend most of my time investing in diverse founders trying to close health equity gaps. And I've been doing this for about 4.5 years. Prior to that, I've had a few roles as an operator, founded a company over a decade ago in the readmission reduction space and sold that business, and then also ran a series of methadone clinics in Maryland, all Medicaid reimbursed, and helped to turn that business around and introduce more of an evidence-based care model. And in between those operating roles, had a few government roles, most recently as the Chief Medical Officer of the National Medicaid Program. And so I spend my time now mostly investing, but also doing research and advocacy at the intersection of innovation, health equity, and regulatory changes to help both kids and adults. And I've had the pleasure of working with my friends at Akili and really excited about the science there.
Fantastic. Well, welcome again. And Lisa, your background.
Yes. Hi, Lisa Palko. I'm a PharmD specializing in psychiatric and neuropharmacology. I am the vice president, head of medical affairs at Akili. And prior to that was in the pharmaceutical industry as far as medical device and digital health. And in prior life was a academician, researcher, and a payer. So I'm delighted to be here.
Well, fantastic. So why don't we get into it and talk a little about the ADHD space? It's been, people have been trying to do it quite a bit in this area, but we really haven't seen over the years that much innovation within the space. Any thoughts on that, perhaps, Andre?
Oh, man. I think in general, innovation in the kid space has really been lagging, and that spans from a policy perspective, innovation there, from a technology perspective, and also from a care delivery perspective. Unfortunately, that gap in innovation sets up real health equity gaps and perpetuates existing health equity gaps. One troubling statistic is if you look at all of the devices that the FDA approves, less than 10% are for a pediatric indication. And that is not reflective of the morbidity experienced by the general population. What it does reflect is a frankly, lack of bravery amongst investors and entrepreneurs to tackle an issue that may not appear as a billion-dollar blockbuster, when in fact you actually can make money and do social good serving pediatric populations. And my friend and colleague Eddie Martucci, to his credit, saw the vision, had a great vision, saw the opportunity to help a lot of kids and do so in a commercially viable way. And so I think what Akili's done actually is a great exemplar of aligning the opportunity for both investors to get really interesting returns, and more importantly, for kids and families to get a critical clinical need met. And so to your question about innovation in the pediatric space, there need to be more Akilis out there. And fortunately, we have Akili. Unfortunately, we have EndeavorRx to kind of lead the charge. But we've got a long way to go.
And when you think about that, either you or Lisa, what do you see as current gaps within the therapy for ADHD?
Well, I would say as far as the gaps, I think we need to go back and really look at the history of ADHD. It's been around, believe it or not, for about 200 years, but we haven't seen much advancement. And that advancement particularly has been more in the traditional pharmaceutical side than anything else. And that could be because of the status quo of just treatment, but also the fact that, we're just starting to scratch the surface of the brain and the neurobiology and the pathophysiology of ADHD. So when I look at the treatment gaps, I mean, certainly we have pharmacological therapies, but they consist really of two molecules. You've got the amphetamines and you have the methylphenidate, and you have a variety, an array of options within there. But again, we haven't broken through. We have non-stimulants, probably not as effective, but I would say really the innovation, and to Akili's credit, is bringing something innovative, safe, and effective for this treatment.
And Andre, as a physician, obviously, what are some of the issues? There's a lot of talk now about putting children on medications. Is it appropriate or not? What are some of the issues in terms of using stimulants that may be faced?
So I think there's a lot of considerations. First and foremost, stimulants can absolutely work. And it's important to establish a trusting bond with the family, understanding their needs, understanding their concerns, and also making sure that the child is appropriately assessed and that we as clinicians reconcile the needs of the family, preferences, cultural sensitivities with the clinical needs of the kiddo. And in some cases, stimulants align both with what is clinically indicated for the child, as well as what is the preference of the child and the family. Having said that, most families I interact with, whether it's addressing ADHD or other conditions, prefer to not put a drug in their kid's body. They prefer to take a non-pharmacologic approach. They prefer to take quote unquote natural as possible, whatever natural means, right? There's a lot of, it really is in the eye of the beholder, eye of the family. When we have an evidence-based, FDA cleared therapeutic intervention that doesn't require a kid to take some synthetic thing and put it in their body, families, one, are surprised because they're not used to that, and two, they're relieved knowing that, oh, wow, this is really interesting to either complement a stimulant that they already have on board, as well as psychotherapy, and or just to try something non-pharmacologic to begin with. And I'll defer to Akili about the labeling and all that. I'm just speaking from my perspective as a clinician, where I may be using a therapeutic intervention on per the label, how it's written, or maybe off-label, but whatever the family needs in that dyad between myself and the family and the kiddo. And so having a digital intervention is a really great tool for me as a clinician, because that broadens my ability to meet families' needs. And that's just speaking from a pure, like, aligning families' needs and clinical indication. When we get into the domain of side effect profile and reducing side effect adverse events or sequelae, that's where innovations like EndeavorRx become really interesting, because when we've got an elementary school age kid that maybe is taking a stimulant, but they're not going to bed, that's a problem. Our kids need to get sleep. So it's really nice to know you can either titrate down the dose of the stimulant and or maybe replace the stimulant with something that's not going to have insomnia, right? Alternatively, when we have undesirable weight loss, stimulants can significantly drop a kiddo's weight, and that's a really important side effect to keep in mind. Again, titrating down on a stimulant or even trying a non-stimulant approach is a really interesting tool that we now have available. And so it really comes down, to summarize, to what are the patient and families' cultural preferences, goals, and then also what's the clinical indication of the kid. And now we have this option that I think at scale, once this becomes understood by primary care pediatricians, it could be a real game changer in terms of how we manage kids with ADHD.
So Lisa, what is EndeavorRx?
EndeavorRx is a digital therapeutic that is FDA authorized and indicated to improve attention function as measured by computer-based testing in children ages 8 to 12-year-old with primarily inattentive or combined type ADHD who have a demonstrated attention issue.
And so as you talked about, this can augment the treatment of using some of these various medications, and you add this as another approach to make it even better, potentially.
Exactly. It make it even better, actually walk the talk of patient-centeredness, meeting patients and families where they are. This is an innovation that allows all those buzzwords to actually happen in the primary care setting.
You know, we've talked a lot about this whole concept of bringing in these personalized digital therapeutic, and they're just really starting to come to market. So what's sort of been the response as you've talked to individuals using the product or the options you've talked about with families or the kids?
So digital is not new to families. These are generally families that grew up, the parents themselves as digital natives. The kids for sure are growing up with some kind of screen around them. So the notion of digital anything, that is not new. The notion that a physician is prescribing a digital intervention, that is new. I don't think it's that hard of a proverbial pill to swallow, so to speak, because families are, as long as there's a close bond with the clinician, they're willing to try things as long as the clinician is saying, yes, this is what I recommend, this is evidence-based, this is safe. Where our hang-up is not with the families. Our hang-up is with the insurers. And this comes down to, I work in a safety net environment. My families cannot afford to pay for healthcare. My families, in many cases, parents are working multiple jobs. They are hustling, they are grinding just to put food on the table. And it is essential for them to get access to evidence-based interventions that insurance, especially Medicaid, covers said intervention. And so when I, as a clinician, board-certified pediatrician, have reviewed the evidence and deemed that a certain intervention is safe for a kiddo, the insurance company should not get in my way. Most importantly, it should not get in the way of the family and the kiddo getting access to something that could fundamentally change the quality and function of their lives. So I don't think it's really an issue of adoption or receptivity to digital therapeutics by families. That pediatricians are going to educate families. The issue is I, as a pediatrician, can't be spending hours on the phone trying to get a prior authorization with an insurance carrier where the physician on the other end is not even a pediatrician. So that's the real hill that we collectively need to kind of climb. I know our friends at Akili are definitely putting in the work and the advocacy to make sure that happens. But I would say, Fred, that's the issue.
And if you're just tuning in, you're listening to a live edition of the AMCP podcast series powered by PopHealth Week on Healthcare Now Radio. We're speaking with Andre Ostrovsky, MD, FAAP, Managing Partner, Social Innovation Ventures, and former U.S. Medicaid Chief Medical Officer, and Lisa Palko, PharmD, Vice President and Head of Medical Affairs for Akili.
And that raises a really interesting one I'd like to dig in just a little bit on. Obviously, it's an issue where you have a ton of expertise. I've been involved in it for years is Medicaid. Obviously, Medicaid is children, a lot of children in Medicaid. Are you beginning to hear or see the recognition from that line of health plan business or state business to look at these digital therapeutics and say, we need to bring these in for the children?
I don't know that there's a focus specifically on children. I do know that there are some progressive plans out there. Highmark recently announced that they're covering several digital therapeutics on their formulary, to their credit. I know there's a lot of innovation with some of our colleagues at Express Scripts. There's digital formularies being created across other PBMs. So the movement is happening. It's not happening quickly enough. And I think it's important to point out, while I mentioned the safety net setting and Medicaid carriers, commercial carriers are also very important here, because there's been now published literature showing that families that have employer-based insurance are also at risk for social risk factors. There's a study by Para et al. In, I believe, June 2021 that quantified social determinant of health needs for employer-insured populations, and they're quite pronounced. So whether it's Medicaid, which definitely would address health equity issues, or it's commercial insurance, the medical policy leadership, the medical directors, the pharmacy directors of these insurance carriers need to be a little bit brave and not be afraid to be the first one to do something. That's the big fear here, right? None of the carriers want to be the first. They'd love to be the second. Someone's got to take a lead. And, to the White House's credit, they did in the president in his State of the Union address identified behavioral health needs, especially in the pediatric space, as a priority. CMS has spoken about closing health equity gaps. They have spoken about addressing behavioral health needs. They haven't done a whole lot of doing. What a great opportunity to take action. Digital therapeutics overall, but especially focused on the pediatric space. That's a low-hanging fruit for a lot of wins for a lot of people.
Absolutely. I think that's sort of the key. No one wants to be the first one out there, but at the same time, they recognize that there is a need. And certainly we have a preponderance of evidence to suggest that if the children are not treated appropriately, that they are at risk for poorer outcomes. And this is a chronic condition, so it needs to be recognized as that. The child will not necessarily grow out of it. And we also know that, data has suggested in children on Medicaid with ADHD don't necessarily get the appropriate care. Medication seems to be prevalent within there. But when you look at guidelines, it's behavioral therapy is really something that's first line, but that requires a lot of effort. It requires investment from parents. And quite frankly, they don't have a lot of time, right? So when you have an opportunity to use something that is actually meeting the family, right? Because it's not just the child, it's the family that you need to be aware of and meet them at their home or at the child's school. Make it easy for them. Oftentimes I heard, children don't want to take stimulants because in school they're singled out because you have to go and get it at the nurse, right? So to have something that you can meet them at their home, I think it provides a fantastic opportunity.
And you raised a fantastic issue, Lisa, which has been really resonating across the country. I see articles on it every day. We have a mental health crisis in a sense in the United States right now, especially among children because of what's happened with the schools, et cetera, and other reasons. But we really have a dearth of therapists. There aren't enough people out there to provide treatment. I was actually looking at a report from the APA, where the American Psychological Association, that the ratio of psychologists to school children was off by an enormous amount based on what they thought the need might be. So how does this sort of fit into that realm? How does it potentially solve that problem?
Well, you're right. There's a limited number of therapists who treat children with ADHD, and that actually shrinks when you look at those that actually take Medicaid as an insurer. And we've had this for decades, I would say, the lack of child and adolescent psychiatrists as well. So you're really forcing the pediatricians to become the first line of defense when it comes to ADHD. So we are offering something that, again, goes across those boundaries, right? It does. You have what we call the inaccessible care or access to care, right? Well, this is something that can be used in the child's home, that they don't have to worry about getting on a bus and traveling miles and miles to see someone. You know, it's great. An apple a day can keep the doctor away, but if you have to travel 20, 30 miles to get that apple, it's not going to help. So I think I think it's our duty, quite frankly, to have an option for children that helps them with their inattention, something that can go unrecognized for years and can only really, quite frankly, lead to poorer outcomes.
So along those lines, Fred, I'm not sure to what extent a digital therapeutic intervention is really going to address the access issue in terms of provider shortages. We just need more providers. I think subspecialty telehealth solutions could be interesting, which I'm happy to elaborate on. I've invested in the space. I think changing regulations around enabling therapists to practice across state lines and extending the flexibilities during the public health emergency, which those flexibilities are going to go away after the public health emergency, that would be a big deal. I think increasing the workforce of providers is important, but the lead time is enormous. I think it's very important to set expectations and boundaries of what one manufacturer can do in terms of the provider shortage and mismatch and load balancing between therapists and kids' needs. I think where there may be access benefit is there are health plans that are taking stimulants off formulary. I know Aetna just took Adderall off formulary, which is, I think, a crime. There's certainly abuse and diversion potential, but you can't take a medication that for many people is very effective off formulary. I think that is probably going to be, or should be, challenged from a legal perspective and like an MHPA perspective. In those cases, actually, Endeavor can step up and potentially fill that gap, but we shouldn't have an insurer dictating what is or isn't prescribed. So that's probably a bigger topic. I think in a rural setting where home delivery of a pill is limited or driving a long distance to a pharmacy is limited, absolutely. That is a use case where digital intervention, all you need is to get a text message from a specialty pharmacy and you get the application downloaded. So that I think is a very real use case of improving access. But I think there's a lot of other things that need to get done to address that provider shortage and mismatch issue.
Yeah, and obviously there's a long time lag, as you talked about, between getting therapists trained and getting them out in the field. And it's something that's being worked on. Just a final comment. On the last episode, we discussed, as you mentioned, Lisa, the president's address, where he talked about strengthening the system's capacity, connecting Americans to care, and supporting Americans by creating healthy environments, all in regards to mental health. Any thoughts or perspectives you'd like to give us on that, Lisa?
I think one of the things that we've learned, through this pandemic is that we are able to step up and address situations immediately. And I think if we're able to replicate that, particularly regarding the mental health crisis, we should. I think it's our duty that we need to really put funds, policies in place, really, and to continue policies that are in place, such as providers across state line, et cetera. I think that would really make great strides in this area.
And Andre, we've got about a minute left. Your thoughts on that?
I think this all comes down to remembering that there's a kid at the end of all this, there's a parent at the end of all this, and I know one of our colleagues, Kelsey, who's a mom of a child with ADHD. I think we all need to remember her story. And watching a mom cry, watching Kelsey cry when she sees the difference of her son just struggling through getting his shoes tied in the morning and barely passing second grade to taking a side effect free digital intervention and finally proudly being able to tie his shoes and be early for the bus to school, and watching the joy that brings to her and enabling Kelsey just to thrive as a mom instead of just trying to stay afloat, of try to handle a kiddo that's bouncing off the walls or not able to pay attention. Like, that's what this all comes down to. And our colleagues at insurance carriers need to remember that individual patient story. Our regulator friends need to remember that patient story. And importantly, there's the rigorous evidence behind all this. So that's what I want to make sure everyone remembers.
Well, that's really a fantastic way to end it with that story. So thank you very much, Andre and Lisa, for joining us on PopHealth Week.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fred.
And back to you, Gregg.
And thank you, Fred. That is the last word for today's broadcast. I want to thank our listeners for tuning in and our guests, Andre Ostrovsky, MD, FAAP, Managing Partner, Social Innovation Ventures, and former U.S. Medicaid Chief Medical Officer, and Lisa Palko, PharmD, Vice President and Head of Medical Affairs for Akili, for their time today. Akili's video game-based cognitive medicine is now being prescribed for inattention in children 8 to 12 with ADHD, and the company is studying the technology in several other patient populations. For more information about Akili, visit Akili Interactive, and that's AKILI Interactive.com. And for more information about their product, EndeavorRx, visit EndeavorRx.com. This live edition of the AMCP podcast series is powered by PopHealth Week. We encourage you to follow, like, and subscribe to the series via www.amcp.org/podcast or the podcast platform of your choice. PopHealth Week streams live on Healthcare Now Radio at 5:30 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 9:30 p.m. Eastern, and 2:30 a.m., 10:30 a.m., and 6:30 p.m. Pacific. And until next time, please stay safe, everyone. Bye now.